Vision. And we are very pleased that you can be here today. We share this with the library because we are partners with the library in so many ways. And so we try to do our program in a way that we can focus on the community. This is time for community discussion. So we do like to move things quickly. My name is Len Rowell. I'm substituting for Susan. Susan is involved with some family health issues, and she regrets that she cannot be here today. So let me just outline briefly what we're going to be doing. We're going to do brief introductions. We're going to then move to a short business meeting. And we hope it'll be the shortest business meeting you've ever been in your whole life. We're trying for a new record. We do this every year this way. And then we'll move to our main presenter, the good doctor over here. And he will lead us in our theme, which is the state of media in Middlebury. And this is a community needs assessment, so lots of participation on your part. We have a presentation by Kurt Broderson regarding equipment and the new video, right? And then we will move into small groups around three different areas. There are the three areas that, where we have our function and our task, and one is production. The other has to do with education, and the third has to do with local lives, the communication in the community. And so at this point, let me introduce some members of the MCTV board. George Belrose and Deborah Feldman, and I've got, see if my list matches. Brian Alexander. We need to do an election for Brian, so I'm going to do that right now. Okay.
I get sound effects for the election.
Sound effects. Okay. Brian has moved from a designated function to a membership at large, right?
Sure.
So Brian's nomination is before you, and everybody has a right to vote in this. This is a community meeting. So all in favor of electing Brian to a term?
Aye.
Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Very good, strong. Yeah, okay. There are some members that are appointed by the various organizations in town. One has to do with the select board, and Farhad is just recently, last night, as a matter of fact,
Yep.
right? Will be the representative from the select board, and Susan will, yes, okay.
I didn't get the applause.
And Susan will be departing from the select board. Tim O'Leary is over here, ACSD, and Maria Graham has been the library representative.
What are you doing back
What are you
there?
in the back for? Oh, man. There's always that one person on the board,
Yes,
right?
okay, Maria.
I'm all ready for the small group.
She's all ready for a small group. Susan wanted me to express appreciation for Maria for all that she has done in this, for this organization and for this committee and in this community. And I said we express the same to you as you depart from this organization. And let's see, who have I, did I miss anybody? No. Kurt, would you like to do
Sure,
another
and
introduction?
one last introduction, since we collaborate closely with the library. Some of you may not have met her yet. Dana Hart is the new library director, and I catch her right in the middle of taking a bite.
Good timing, yes.
And
You can make a speech.
as Len mentioned, Maria is leaving. She was the designated board member by the Ilsley trustees. The select board, the school board, and the trustees appoint members to our board that serve until they're replaced at those boards' discretion. So Dana and the ILSI trustees will be appointing Maria's replacement. We'll be talking about that at the next ILSI trustees meeting. Couldn't do it without the library. We're on the top floor of the library, but we like to think of it as being infused throughout it, and similarly where the library is infused in our programs.
Okay. Let's go to the business meeting. You'll find this on the sheet. I hope everyone has a copy of this or can look on. We call this meeting to order. We ask for approval for the annual meeting minutes of 2017. You want to take a quick look at those? We have a secretary who writes short and concise minutes, as you will see. Is there a motion to accept the minutes from last year's annual meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. We've already elected, Brian to the 1 year, to the at-large board team member. We will need to vote for the adoption of the budget. The budget is on a separate sheet. Any questions about the budget?
You might want to explain that the budget is much more extensive than this, but this was just for the purpose of this meeting, just a bare bones listing.
Yeah, if people have questions about the budget, the board reviewed and approved the budget at their last meeting to present tonight's meeting. This just shows income and expenses. It's a balanced budget. It does allow us to replenish the operations and capital funds, which would position us well moving into the future.
Any other questions? Are you ready to vote on the budget? Is there a motion?
I move.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any other business? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. It is done. Short and easy.
Is that a record?
I think it's pretty close. Now, we're very pleased to be able to introduce someone that I think you all know, but Brian Alexander is our guru of all things future and all things past. And we are, he does for us in our monthly meeting,
I can switch over.
he does future trends. And it was so tempting to start with future trends, we finally had to move future trends later on the agenda so we could do the other work and then work on future trends. So Brian, you're on.
Well, excellent. As long as I can manage to cause technology confusion, that's always a good sign. If you don't break technology right away, it's not really working. So let's see. Oh, there we go. If I talk like this, you couldn't hear me in the back, right? Excellent. I'm especially concerned about the gentleman with the beard. I mean, that's the high priority audience. So, in 20 minutes, I'd like to give you some ways of thinking about the future of technology and media. And I'd like to give them to you from as many different perspectives as possible. So I'd like to hear what you think as we go along. This, by the way, is a shot of a tool called Simon, which is not the 1970s children's toy. This is a little robot built by IBM. It's an intelligent assistant like Alexa or Siri, designed to float in the International Space Station. But that's not the exciting bit. What I'd like to talk about is how the media landscape is changing. This is a wonderful photo. Can you see this okay?
Can I interrupt you a second? Because we were
You just
taught
did.
on select board to use the microphone if you're taping it. You know, so I know you're loud, but
Oh, thanks a lot. But you want me to stay here the whole
you might
time?
want to just hover closer to the
How am I
microphone.
doing? From here? This better?
I'm not sure it is better, actually, I don't know why.
Okay.
But, well, of course, you're not trying to project right now.
Can you pick me up now?
Yeah?
We're not broadcasting, so
We need an
Oh,
overhead
okay.
boom.
but it's
All right.
more
I
for
just-
internal purposes.
Oh, this is great. This is excellent.
It's good content, so if people are watching,
Well, it's very kind of you to say, but it's also the process of doing this. So we're talking about media. This is a photo with a very cute name of Tabloid and Tablet. And I like it very much because it shows, among other things, in one snapshot, the media variety that we get to experience now. So a couple of things to think about when we think about technology. That already we are in a mobile world. We are living in a world saturated with social media. In fact, we'll probably stop saying media and just say media instead of social. Cloud computing is something that we rely on very extensively. Digital video is, as this meeting can tell you, clearly very, very important. And computer gaming is the world's second largest culture industry, bigger than movies, bigger than TV. We also live in a curious world where we now realize that we don't have any privacy. And more or less, we're pretty much okay with that, which is really interesting. You know, that after Snowden showed us how thoroughly surveyed we are, we kept using our phones, which compromise our privacy in ways that the Stasi would have loved to have been able to do. In fact, there's so many developments with technology that it helps to boil them down to a few different keywords. This is the founder of Wired Magazine, Kevin Kelly, who generated 8 verbs. As a former English professor, I love this idea very much. And I want to pull out 4 of them to really draw your attention to. One of them is accessing. Let me just ask you in the audience, where do you get your music these days? Where do you listen to? I'm sorry? Pandora, right? Spotify? Anybody use YouTube for music?
Yes.
Yeah. I have to. My musical tastes are so strange that Pandora just has a coronary one. It says,
Radio?
that counts. That counts. AM or FM, both. You know, moving forward to the 1980s. But the point here that all of these have in common, including radio, is that you don't own any of them. We access the content rather than buying it. So instead of having an LP or a cassette tape or 8-track or a DVD or a CD, we rely on YouTube or Pandora. We access the content. It's like Netflix streaming. That's a key development. The second one is sharing, or what lawyers quaintly refer to as rampant copyright violation. We love to be able to share content we have. Some of you of a certain age might remember making audio tapes for friends, mixtapes. That took a lot of love, and now it's a lot easier to do. We love sharing this way. We also like cognifying. That is, we keep adding little bits of AI to our different tools. So if you go to Google and type in part of a search, it tries to guess what you're going to do next. More and more of our tools have that. And beyond that, we filter. That is, we have so much information, so many different sources that we rely on other people or technologies to help filter our way to them. Put those 4 verbs together. It's a different kind of technology environment than we had just 10 years ago. About mobile. Pretty much everywhere in the world except for Vermont, mobile has become the first way that we connect. In fact, there was a company that just went belly up a few weeks ago that was trying to bring mobile broadband to 2 countries, to the US and Vermont and to Rwanda. And the founders said it was much more difficult to do in Vermont. But mobile has become the world's leading way that we connect with the internet and technology. And in fact, if you're using a desktop or a laptop computer, that's kind of a little out of date right now. That's not futuristic. What might be futuristic is virtual reality. If you haven't had a chance to play with a VR tool, I strongly recommend it. Dana, do we have any VR gear at the library?
We don't yet.
Yet is a good word.
Thinking about it, aware of it.
I strongly recommend it, just if you can. I mean, one thing you can do, for example, with a tool called Tilt Brush, is you can draw in 3 dimensions, and then you can manipulate the tool. So, for example, you put a goggle on, you draw something, and you can walk around it, or even make a magic door and step through it. VR is a really different way of presenting and working with information and digital technology. And here are 3 ways of thinking about it. One is that it may play out in a very terrifying way. This is a grim picture, although it wasn't supposed to be. Here's Mark Zuckerberg walking past a bunch of people, and they look like zombies. It looks like something from a nightmarish dystopian thing. That's possible. I mean, to use VR, you have to gather so much data about people that you can really have a kind of nightmarish closed environment. That's one possibility. Second possibility is it might make you look like an idiot, and you might not use it. This is, I think, the worst picture of technology taken in the past 20 years, and it's possible. We've had technologies flop. You might remember 3D TV, for example, which died. 3D movies would have died if it wasn't for one good film. So it's possible that VR is expensive, difficult, and awkward. We might not use it very much. This is my bet for VR, that it will become boring. So think about it. On the right, we have President Obama, the most powerful man in the world, trying to look cool because he's President Obama, and still looking kind of like an idiot. But it's really interesting, right? But off to the left is what interests me. His administrative assistant, who is totally bored with this, and she's checking Facebook or doing email. Let me ask you, what's the company in the world doing the most with VR right now? What company is innovating the most and making the most VR technology?
Samsung?
No, not Samsung. Worse, Microsoft. The most anti-sexy company of all time. I mean, the most boring company, and they're doing lots of work. My point is, VR can be used for a lot of stuff, practical stuff. It might just become like Outlook or like Microsoft Word. It might get a little more advanced because you can combine virtual reality with augmented reality. Augmented reality is an old term, but it refers to taking digital content and tying it to the physical world. So you can think about if you've walked around with Google Maps and it tells you to go left. You don't drive with Google Maps because that's wrong, but we all do. But any tool that does that, so imagine being able to combine these two technologies, to have lenses in front of your eyes in some way, be it a visor or glasses, and to see the world around you with digital content superimposed on it. So to look, for example, at the sky and obtain meteorological information with the clouds you look at. If we combine these two, we call it mixed reality. That may be a completely new way that we do computing. That's not radically strange enough. You can go still further. While we're talking about big developments, it's important to think about small developments. We can keep shrinking computing technology and making it more powerful. And one way of thinking about that is of technology that might not be visible very closely. This is a combination of a radio receiver, Wi-Fi, with storage and a sensor the size of a grain of rice. It's already old. This is literally a museum piece. You can find it in San Francisco in the Museum of Computing History. We might be at the stage where we have invisible computing. If we can do that, if we can have computing devices that are so small, we can put them under chairs, in tires of cars, in different parts of our body, in our clothing, we might have what some call the Internet of Things. Imagine being able to get data from every part of the world. It can be terrifying, absolutely. And right now, you make a great face, oh, I'm doing good. I mean, we still have shreds of privacy left, or we think we do. But also, we can think about very possibilities of this. This is just one technology. We also have 3D printing. Have any of you played with a 3D printer or watched one before? Yeah, if you haven't, I strongly recommend it. The experience is like this. In the 1970s, we had the Xerox copier. In Star Trek, you have the replicator. And 3D printing is right about here. And it's trying to get this far. We're able to print all kinds of things, like building parts and bones. We're just seeing how far we can go with that. One more technology to mention. We're starting to figure out what automation can do. And it's getting pretty exciting and pretty disturbing and has really astonishing possibilities. I mean, right now we already have automation in terms of factories that's widespread across the world. We have the phenomenon of dark factories, factories that work without lights because there are no humans and they don't need visual sensors. In fact, we've seen self-driving cars, which are better than humans right now, so far driving right now. We have robots being used not just in industry, but also at war. We have software that writes journalism in sports, in finance, in meteorology. We even have software that trades between stock market companies and hedge funds. In fact, we have robots that can be creative. This is a photo I took of a friend of mine in Mexico City, and this is what happened when I fed it into a computer program by Google called Deep Dream. Made it into a psychedelic description. In fact, we have to go a little still further forward. The company that owns Google had this phrase. You know, we used to have a mobile-first world, which is not true in Vermont, but just go with this. Imagine if we have an AI-first world, how that changes how we design just about everything. So, to give you a couple of thoughts and then I'll stop. It might be that automation is so thorough that we face widespread underemployment or unemployment. So we have to think about what that means for life. If our job defines us as who we are, or if school is about preparing us for jobs, what happens in this future when we have more leisure time than we wanted? We also have to think about this. I mentioned that self-driving cars are better than us at driving. It's not too hard. I mean, Americans kill, what, about 20, 30,000 people a year? We're pretty good at homicidal mania on the roads, actually. Self-driving, one of the reasons self-driving cars are advancing is because insurance companies know they're less lethal than we are, and they will start punishing us for driving cars pretty soon. But think about what that means. Our software and hardware is better than we are at something else. A Microsoft team had a wonderful project where they're doing transcription of voice, and their software is better at transcribing voice than humans already. What happens when we are increasingly outmoded? When function after function is better performed by silicon than by carbon? We have to think hard about this. Okay, those are a few technologies, a few things about media to think about. Our assignment now is, now that your heads are buzzing with all these possibilities and ideas, is we have to break into 3 groups and think about the future of media, the future of MCTV, in 3 different sections, which are storytelling, and what are the other 2?
Production and
Education. Storytelling.
Yeah.
Before we split, I'll show the video and then.
Okay, before we do that, this was a whole bunch of technologies thrown at you in just a few minutes, even if you're listening to radio or listening to Spotify. Any quick questions about any of these? Or any huzzas of celebration or groans of terror and dismay? Please.
About energy for these technologies.
Yes. That's a serious problem. And almost nobody's talking about it. I'm glad you brought that up.
Power outages,
Yeah.
climate disruptions,
Yes. Which,
cheap energy.
and on top of that, we don't have a grid that can sustain that right now. So if we get clobbered by nor'easters, just hypothetically imagine that, we should be able to draw on power generated by, say, imagine the Southwest and the Midwest covered with solar cells and wind farms, but we can't. We should be able to do that, right? That's going to be very difficult to do. Not to mention local power generation. Yeah. Glad you mentioned that. Please, Dana.
Well, kind of along with that, I think talking about data storage, and the issue this Internet of Things, where does all that tremendous data live?
So please go ahead.
And then I was also separately, I was thinking a lot today as I was preparing for this about net neutrality and how things might be changing in the future. And do you have thoughts about how that ties into all this?
Absolutely.
future technology?
So in terms of storage, this is a major issue. I mean, one of the ideas is that storage keeps getting cheaper and easier to access year after year. That seems to be the case so far, although you'll see Amazon, Google, IBM opening huge data storage centers around the world, which are in many ways kind of like the Fort Knoxes of our time. When I mentioned cloud computing, that used to be controversial about 10 years ago. Now we just simply use it. We happily store things off-site. So that seems to be where we're headed right now. And as we get more and more storage, we'll keep storing it. Now, VR and mixed reality, those are huge files to store. So moving them and storing them have very powerful implications. Vermont Broadband can't handle VR right now. It's just too enormous. It knocks down big networks. Storage, we have to ramp that up, so that's a good point. Net neutrality is something which is fascinating. I've been following this idea called the balkanization of the internet, where when you look at the initial idea of the internet, anybody could connect to anything else. The web was built on top of the internet so that any browser can connect with anything else. That was the idea. But we've been trying to segment it and carve it out in different ways, in all kinds of ways. China, for example, has the Great Firewall of China, which more or less controls content within that domain. And net neutrality gives ISPs in the United States the opportunity to discriminate. So it may be that, hypothetically, Time Warner decides that any content from libraries is just not quite as good. So they slow that down. But content that comes from Netflix is awesome and gets sped right up. Net neutrality is a disaster right now. I've been following it very closely. We can talk more about it if you like. But this has huge implications for MCTV, because will people be able to access this material without either having it slowed down or simply blocked, or having to pay more money to be able to get it? Maybe Comcast will have an extra fee for PEG access content. I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, not because it's a happy thing, but because it's a significant and important thing. Thank you. Please.
Well, the other thing you've taught us is equity, like through adequate
Yes.
broadband access.
Yes.
We have that obstacle.
Well, I think that is simply growing. I mean, socioeconomic inequality is rising, and nothing is stalling it right now. And that drives a lot of this. In the United States, urban versus rural, as we talked about before, is a huge obstacle for broadband, and that's not slowing down at all right now. So equity is a major issue. If we don't fix this, there's going to be major cultural and perhaps political fallout in the far future, say 4 years from now. Yeah, Dick, please.
What's happening with search?
Search tools are pretty interesting. Right now, there's some debate about Google, whether or not Google has been compromised because of their emphasis on sale and ads. So far, it's the most powerful one, and very few people have moved to use, say, DuckDuckGo or Bing. But one of the things that's interesting for this is the rise of audio search. You see, audio content, you can't search it unless it's transcribed. So if you look at a if you look at a YouTube video, you actually have to manually watch it if you want to look for a keyword, unless someone takes the time to transcribe it. So unless we have automatic transcription, which is coming, we have to have search tools that can dive in and work with that. One of the things I'm interested in is how search can get broken up by net neutrality. So if you search for something and I search for something and we're on different networks, if we get different results, that starts again to balkanize our experience. Now, automation should be able to help, to some degree account for that, depending on how we structure automation. So it may be, again, a question of equity. If I'm, say, a member of the 1%, do I get different AI experience than someone from the bottom 20%? That can then break up and separate our internet experience. I keep watching for that.
You think that the speech, well, one of the things that I always thought was the holy grail of documenting and saving public meetings is the ability to do word searches on prior meetings. And,
Yes.
And I guess you have to have a transcription and then search the transcription in order to come up with a section of the meeting or a particular.
And then maybe we can go beyond that too, and we can include more data about the audio, such as tone, right? Wouldn't that be amazing? Search for angry uses of the word parking, right? I mean, I think we should be able to do that at some point, much less to search for images within a video feed.
Yeah.
There's a lot more going on, but I wanted to make sure that your brains were fizzing with some ideas. Yeah, please, George.
Brian, you're certainly aware that the board is always concerned, can we afford it? Should we wait a generation?
Yeah.
Is this stuff the kind of thing that a community television station could embark on, or is it beyond our means?
I think there are a lot of ways of answering that, and I would actually rather have the small groups answer that question. Did you all hear that question? Yeah. I mean, so when I mentioned, I'm just saying, okay, Dana, get us VR for the library. I mean, that's one. It's one way to think about the particular mission of the library. And it's public facing. Should it experiment with buying, say, one piece of hardware so that kids can try this and so on? Or should MCTV invest in that as a production tool? Or should we wait for, say, the college to do a public event or somebody else in the area, say, the Folk Life Center? That's the kind of discussion we have to have when it comes to VR, when it comes to automation, when it comes to all these different technologies. You wanted to show us a video. Speaking of video,
So before we break into the smaller groups, the video will ask some questions. It'll give some examples of content that we've worked with in the last year, and hopefully it will spark some thought as we move into the discussion phase.
can you see? Can you see it?
So what is the role of ILSI and MCTV when our skills are changing? This is from a thank you card Tim received from a kindergartner that Tim helped teach green screening to. So kindergartners are starting this. I like the filming. Here's a little older kid working with green screen.
Get food and then they go to sleep and save their food sometimes for later. On Mars, there's a canyon 4 times as deep as the Grand Canyon.
Little older.
I'm here today in the mountains of China to teach you about pandas. Pandas are a type of fish, but they act similar to cats and raccoons.
So there's not just the technical skills of learning the camera and the editing, but how to be on camera, how to present to an audience, This is sort of at the, an older end of that spectrum. This is from a Career Center student. So we have an international award-winning animator who lives locally who is 18. She's only a few steps behind him, and the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders I work with pretty regularly in the library are only a few. They could probably show you as good stuff, it's just not as long. Another question is, what is the role of Ilsley and MCTV when our tools are changing? Everyone's got what in a few years ago would have constituted a recording studio in your pocket. So here's some of the tools that can go with a cell phone to stabilize your footage. We have a stabilizer here for bigger cameras. This is right downtown, filmed with that. This is footage that Tim filmed with his drone, giving us another tool.
Last maybe a year and a half ago.
Another question is, what is the role of Ilsley and MCTV when our stories are changing? Some of it's the skills and the tools enable us to tell new stories. Some of it's just stories we haven't been able to tell. The image on the left, we'll see video clips of both of these. And this is a good place to talk about partnerships. Is the United Way fundraiser concert at the Snowball. I think it's the first concert ever at the Snowball. Lisa and Andy are here partly representing Middlebury Underground, which is one of the organizations that made that possible. United Way, we went out to film it, so it was a collaborative event. On the right, we don't currently have any school sports running on TV. We have the tools and the skills to do that, and I would like to see us get some of that on the air. Let's see video clips from a couple of these. There's a snowball in a little warmer weather. The setup we used to film that's back here. Run it down, that's it, run it down. What you're looking at. So that's another good example of a partnership. Town Hall Theater's program called Shakespeare It's Elementary works with a number of the elementary schools. Every year they put on a Shakespeare play at Town Hall Theater. We've filmed it for the last 3 or 4 years. Gets out regularly in the schools as well. And then what is the role of Ilsley and MCTV when our audiences are changing? And you can certainly watch us on channel 15 and 16. Our website is on the left. middleburycommunitytv.org. Our YouTube channel is on the right, so people can access us those ways. If you have Apple TV or Roku, I believe they have a YouTube app now, and you can subscribe to MCTV through that and watch it that way if you don't have cable. You can also get to different video content, select board meetings. Town website has, like Dick was talking about, the holy grail of sort of tying transcripts, agendas, and videos together. You know, that might be a place where we can get someday. Ilsley's website, lower corner here, is Ilsley TV, which has pretty much all of the events that happen and are filmed in the town, in the meeting room. If you go to Ilsley TV, there's also a link to Ilsley Youth TV, where you can see things that the kids have made. And the top 10 treasures of Middlebury, of Ilsley. And then lastly, how can Ilsley and MCTV help you individually, organizationally, tell your stories? And that's sort of the big question that we wanted to then break out into groups, and do you want to MC the breaking out before we?
So another thing that you do is like the bulletin board, both here in the town office and at the Ilsley Library. So it's just another medium, and what we've heard is that people are looking for calendar, you know, like to be able to see what's going on anywhere, and imagine being able to also find your parking spots. But I mean,
There's
or
an app-
how these
there's an
rooms
app.
are being used, or who's using the rooms both at Ilsley and the community room and here, so I don't know what category that falls into, so I was looking, you know, like, but it's something that I'm thinking about because I know that the public is asking for that.
So we would like to invite you to pick a group that you would like to work with. I would assume that equipment would be over there, right? Since we're,
Right, and I hesitated to sort of make it all about the equipment. I did bring this here, and this is sort of for everybody to sort of later on, you know, take a tour of. Some of you are very familiar with stuff, some of you are not. Because our three sort of general categories were production, which is not just the camera side, but hosts and organizers of producers of shows. Education, fairly self-explanatory. I think Tim was going to sort of be the facilitator of that group. And then community stories, community voices.
Right. Okay. So I would suggest one group over here, the production group. One group, people who are interested in education there, and then people who would like to participate. Excuse me?
Why don't you have education group around Tim?
Okay, all right. And then we'll put the community stories over here,
Okay.
all right?
Before we break, could we collectively give some direction to those groups, or a little bit more? Like how much time will we spend in those groups?
Okay.
Will we come back and share highlights from the groups? Just some.
I think we allocated 15 minutes, was that right?
20.
20 minutes for the groups. And then we'll come back and report back. So each
Right.
group should have someone who can do that.
And our intent is to be done by 6 o'clock. That's what we said, from 4:30 to 6 o'clock.
Okay.
Okay,
So
so
that probably gives you 20 to 25.
Well, let's take 20 and then
that gives us more time
report back.
together.
Yeah, report
Okay.
back, and then still
About a
time
20
people to
minute.
check out some of the.
Yeah.
Right.
So Tim for education, Len for storytelling, and Kurt, production.
Okay. Bring over some chairs, I guess.
In their K-6 experience, they get at least one video production opportunity, and tomorrow we have an early release day, and our focus for the 3 hours is around technology, and teachers just want time using and practicing the Sweet
video production software. And so I think it's exciting. We have to constantly advocate for the importance of it. And then as teachers get familiar tomorrow, they play with it for an hour or two, and they might go back to their classes and teach their kids. And that's just
And we could post them on our MCTV YouTube channel.
Yeah, that's
and
great.
Grandma can see them, and
Yeah,
then
and
it's
Kurt
really-
helps us, also, I should put
It's
that
so
plug in.
good.
You post a lot and help us post on Mary Hogan TV,
Yeah.
YouTube TV, about the events at school that are fun and exciting.
And it doesn't get more local than that,
Right,
right?
that's
Your local
really-
kids doing videos about their town. And I actually, as I was listening to you talk, I think tweens and teens have more in common with seniors than you would think, because they are very focused on themselves, and they're hyper-local, right? Because it's all about them. And they have
Right.
unique perspectives, and I think, yeah, that hyper-local is what's really the strength of all these institutions.
You talked about some hurdles of the geography of ACSD and easy access to Mary Hogan, and we can walk there. But it represents about half of our PK6 population, and the other half is distributed among 6 other elementary schools. And just what that looks like as we think about equity of opportunity.
That's really
That it's not just for some of our students.
Mm-hmm.
That's a tough,
Yeah.
it's a tough hurdle, but it's
No.
one that's clear.
You work across all those schools, right?
Yes.
You personally, I mean.
I work at 9 schools in the central office. Yes.
Okay, so you get to be equity.
Yeah.
It's definitely trying, is what I heard in our
Yeah.
group, which is one of the strengths of MCTV, I
But hopefully we have multiple strands of equity, and I'm one of them.
think.
Oh, this is so interesting. I mean, we began by talking about MCTV and the library, and now we really brought into the conversation as kind of a third leg of a tripod, the ACSD system,
Yes.
the public schools. And I think that's really important. That seems to, again, I'm just trying to observe this quickly, but it seems to be a synthesis that we're talking about. You could see it in the audience. We have so many people working from the staff. But when you're talking about having elementary school kids make videos, put them on YouTube, that sounds like it's fulfilling this community mission right away. I want to, if I could reflect back a couple other themes that I've seen coming up. I'm conscious of time. Len gave us a drop-dead deadline of 6 o'clock, so I'm between you, hummus, and traffic, so I got to be careful. One other theme that came up was this repeated theme of empowered independent users, so that anybody can conceivably do all this video work or all the technology work without having to go to the library or MCTV or to the schools. So that dynamic kept coming up. Why would anybody work with the library or MCTV or the schools? That was one theme. A second was the idea, and forgive me if I get this wrong, we were talking, is it Andy? Identifying interested young people to make content, right? Be it video or audio or photography. So this kind of, if you will, this evangelical desire has come up as a thing that we will have to expand this and add more. So I want to make sure we don't lose that theme. There is also the idea of the change of technology changing quickly, and how that changes what we do. So in many ways, we have huge rigs, great cameras, and then that's one way. And then we have all these little devices, little cameras, some which I spoke about before. These technologies are changing very quickly, and how we cope with that. And then coming back to equity, there is the question of uneven digital access in all kinds of different ways. And that, again, seems to be the major theme. If I can come back to George's question, which I don't think we've addressed yet, which is how do we, if we're advising MCTV right now, how do we figure out what to do next? How do we choose which technologies to grab onto? I think we haven't gotten a detailed program for action, but I think we've gotten a lot of themes here. Technologies that we can choose perhaps as they help us become more hyperlocal, as they help us support our very young and very old population. There is those are a few of the themes that have come up. How does that sound? Have we captured our discussion so far? Have we generated a corpus to advise Kurt and the board going forward? Is there more from the board that you would like to add?
Just a thank you for everybody who came tonight to be part of this conversation.
Yes. Thank
And
you
an
very much.
invitation to continue to be part of the conversation, that it's an open board. In other words, we're wanting to work with the community more rather than less, and ready to do that. The ideas that we generate here and today, I hope we can expand. That's
Thank you all very, very much.
So there's plenty of food left.
Oh, yes.
We'll probably bring some over to the library for the first Wednesday talk, and they'll be happily surprised to find out that they're being fed as well as informed. I'll stay around, and if people want to see how some of the gear works
Definitely.
before we take it down, even if you just push a camera a little bit, all good. And you can take little dog, I don't have bags, so I can't really say doggy bags, but you want to take anything with you. Doggy plate, right. One hand for your cell phone / recording studio, and one hand for hummus and chips and cheese.
It's the ideal life. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
We should thank Brian, too,
Yeah, thank you.
who always does Brian
Thank you.
guru.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to go back to that future trend thing with you and every step.
I'm glad to.